You care about jobs? You should care about immigration policy. You care about day-to-day crime? You should care about immigration policy. You care about national security. You care about deterring Islamism, jihadism, deterring MS-13, trendy Aragua, basic day-to-day safety. You care about preventing the next 9/11. Let's not forget that the 9/11 hijackers were here on expired visas. We the people, the preamble to the Constitution begins. The very notion of we the people implies that there is a people. And if there is a people, we the people of the United States, as the case may be, if there is a people, it logically follows that there are other peoples. This is the way that it has been in human civilization society since time immemorial. The Bible is replete with stories of various peoples. The Bible is replete with stories of various nations. The relevant question, then, when it comes to contemporary public policy is, who is a people? What constitutes a people? What constitutes a nation? And how do we define what constitutes a sound immigration policy? We're going to get into all this and a lot more a little bit later on the show with Mark Krikorian, longstanding, one of my favorite public policy thinkers and policy wonks when it comes to the immigration topic. Mark is the executive director for the Center of Immigration Studies. We'll get to him in just a little bit. But I have always been of the opinion, before we get to Mark, that immigration is the most important, literally the most important of all of the various public policy issues that contemporary statesmen in the United States confront. And that is the case for a very simple reason. There is no other issue in all of public policy that affects every area of our lives. You care about wages? You should care about immigration policy. You care about jobs? You should care about immigration policy. You care about day-to-day crime? You should care about immigration policy. You care about national security. You care about deterring Islamism, jihadism, deterring MS-13, trendy Aragua, basic day-to-day safety. You care about preventing the next 9/11. Let's not forget that the 9/11 hijackers were here on expired visas. But above all, the question of immigration really does cut to the core of what is we the people, of what Aristotle, back in his book Politics, would have referred to as the polis, as the polity, as the city-state, the nation-state. A people have to have something in common. No, that's not to go down the rabbit hole, as many in the fringe corners sometimes do these days, of blood in soil. No, obviously not. But a people, a nation, should certainly have something in common. We can debate exactly what that something is. John Jay, writing in the Federalist No. 2, one of the more well-known of the early Federalist Papers, the series of pseudonymous essays written in support of ratification of the U.S. Constitution in the late 1780s, John Jay, in Federalist 2, writes quite movingly about how this people of former Englishmen turned young American colonists did come from a similar background. They shared a similar language, the English language. In that context, they shared a largely, not exclusively, but a largely similar religion, namely Protestantism. They had the same traits and mannerisms and worldview in many ways. They obviously differed in many ways as well, as anyone familiar with the American founding can tell you. But there has to be something in common there. Something a bit more in common, you might say, than mere loyalty to abstract principles. The notion of a creedal nation, the notion that the United States of America was simply founded as a come one, come all, as a beacon of open borders to just let in the peoples of the world, the John Lennon imagined utopia. And all you have to do to be a good American in good standing is to come here, pay your taxes, maybe you skirt your taxes a little bit, and to assert your loyalty to the principles of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. That was the notion this creedal conception of America, and by extension, a creedal ideological open borders adjacent conception of immigration policy, that was the mentality that ruled the roost across the political spectrum from the left to the right for a very, very long time. But one of the reasons that Donald Trump shocked the Republican Party and by extension shocked America and shocked the world in 2016 is because that's not how he conceived of the United States. That's not how he conceived of immigration policy. Is America actually a nation of immigrants, as is often said, or is it a nation of citizens that is capable at times of assimilating immigrants? For a very long time, after the 1960s in particular, starting with the Hart-Sellers Act, the Immigration Nationality Act of 1965, the Ted Kennedy legislation during the height of the Lyndon Johnson administration, ever since then, America has let in roughly an average of 1 million illegal immigrants a year. This has continued for over half a century. Compare that with the large-scale legal immigration of the Ellis Island wave. That's when my ancestors personally came. This would have been in the late 19th century into the early 20th century, coming through Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, roughly 40 years, give or take, early 1880s until the early 1920s. But then, during the Calvin Coolidge administration, it was so obvious to the Coolidge administration and to their allies in Congress that when you have this many large-scale immigrants, it's time to hit a pause button and focus on assimilation. It was so obvious to them that a complete immigration moratorium passed the United States House at President Coolidge's urging with a voice vote. It wasn't even a roll call tally. It was the backlash against the post-1965 large-scale legal immigration agenda combined with the complete failure to patrol and secure our southern border and the illegal immigration agenda. That is, by and large, what has motivated the Trump phenomenon. This is the sine qua non issue, the number one issue for the MAGA Trump administration phenomenon. If you have any interest in understanding what we on the nationalist populist right are trying to do and trying to change course and try to change the direction of conservatism away from the pre-2016, the Bush-era status quo ante, if you care about understanding that, you have to understand that the era of tight borders, the era of nationalism is here. The era of nationalism is here, and the era of universalism, open borders, and globalism is gone. It is gone. It is not coming back. We are not going back. We are not going back to the 2016 status quo ante. Now, the Trump administration, the first time around, from 2017 to 2021, sought to implement this agenda. In many ways, they did a good job. Now, there was a large-scale surge in illegal immigration in 2019, but frankly, all that surge looks like child's play in hindsight in the context of the interregnum of the Biden regime that followed from 2021 to 2025. That Biden administration letting in millions and millions and millions of unvetted, unaccountable illegal aliens. Since retaking power in January, President Donald Trump has sought, including via his DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, and perhaps above all by his so-called border czar, Tom Homan, he has sought to implement an immigration enforcement agenda to actually remove illegal aliens, those who are in this country illegally, whether they cross the border illegally or overstay the visa, and for whatever reason, they are here and should not be here. Tom Homan, as I mentioned, has been in the forefront of that. Let's go ahead and take a listen to Tom Homan recently on Laura Ingram's Fox News show talking about the progress on this issue to date.
We're at over 400,000 deportations and you know, between CBP and ICE, and that's just since the president took office. The first 4 months of the fiscal year, we can't count them because you know Joe Biden wasn't doing anything. But here's what people need to understand: two things. Number one, over 1.5 million illegal aliens, close to 1.6 illegal aliens already left the country on their own. Why? Because they see what ICE is doing out there every day. One of the reasons we have the most secure border in the history of this nation is because the great work of the men and women of the Border Patrol, the great work of President Trump and his leadership, but also because ICE is out there, over 1,000 teams all across the country arresting people. So a lot of people have left, a lot of people aren't coming, which helps to secure that border.
Hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens removed, according to Tom Homan. NBC News, for what it's worth, not exactly conservative media. NBC News, in a recent report, very much corroborating what Tom Homan said. Go ahead and take a listen to that as well.
We've got the most controlled border we've ever had in the history, and in my lifetime in the Border Patrol.
In Eagle Pass, Texas, during the Biden administration, more than 2,000 migrants crossed into the U.S. in a single day. But now, under President Trump's policies, officers encounter just 20 migrants a day here. Tonight, DHS touting the lowest number of illegal border crossings since 1970. And Border Patrol Chief Mike Banks tells us they'll expand the 1 mile of defensive buoys on the Rio Grande.
We've got about 500 miles identified across the entire Texas border where we're going to place these in the river.
Is this the new wall?
It's defense in depth.
We were here 2 years ago where migrants used to carry children on their backs to get across this river and cut through this barbed wire to get to the United States. They would see hundreds, even thousands a day in this very spot.
Record lows under the Trump administration of legal crossings. Makes sense, doesn't it? If you get the message out there loudly and clearly that if you are here illegally, we will deport you. Which, make no mistake, is the message that this administration has sent. Kristi Noem, have y'all seen those advertisements? I see them basically every time I turn on my TV, every time I listen to AM radio in the car. Is an advertisement from Kristi Noem saying, if you are here illegally, get out before we find you. In many ways, this is what Mitt Romney referred to in the 2012 primary as self-deportation. If you have a credible threat of deporting an illegal alien, many of them perhaps might just flee of their own accord. President Trump, Wadsworth, seems to think that this is all going quite well. He actually was talking about it in his recent United Nations speech about a month ago. Go ahead and take a listen to that.
Our message is very simple. If you come illegally into the United States, you're going to jail, or you're going back to where you came from, or perhaps even further than that. You know what that means.
And the United Nations is definitely the target audience for this, because the United Nations is the pinnacle, it is the embodiment of the transnational globalist open borders agenda. Donald Trump is the antithesis of that. Think about it. You really have two ways to view human civilization in the abstract. You have the notion of distinct peoples and distinct nations, which necessarily entails borders, on the one hand. On the other hand, you have empire, imperialism, universalism, and globalism. Ideologies that have no practical use for trying to distinguish among religions, peoples, tribes, and so forth, but think that we are essentially just in a kumbaya, let's hold hands, pass the peace pipe sort of world. In many ways, this contrast goes back all the way to antiquity. Think about the Roman Empire, one of the first great, massive empires. They conquered all sorts of peoples of different creeds, of different ideologies. They had no respect for borders. You might call that the predecessor, in some ways, for globalism. For a crass analogy, but in many ways, a predecessor for whether it's European Union liberalism today, World Economic Forum, United Nations style transnationalism, and so forth. By contrast, in antiquity, you had the biblical model of the nation state. Because the nation state, which in its modern incarnation is formed after the 30 Years' War in Europe in 1648 as part of the Treaty of Westphalia, that's what we call the Westphalian nation state system, the classical biblical model of the nation state goes back literally to the Hebrew Bible. When King David unites the tribes of Israel in Jerusalem and declares that the tribes are now a concrete nation with defined borders, because those borders are defined by no less than God himself, that's a nation. That is nationalism. That is border control. That's the duality, folks. Biblical nationalism versus post-biblical universalism and globalism. For far too long, for far, far, far too long, leaders of all political stripes, from the far left to the right liberals, the Bush administration, folks like that, were just varying stripes of post-biblical globalism or universalism. Donald Trump who, as a matter of his personal biography, is an imperfect fit for, let's call it, biblical nationalism. But he's a patriot. And as a patriot, he understands that America is not an abstract ideological experiment to just throw anyone from all corners of the world. Emma Lazarus wrote a poem. That poem is at the Statue of Liberty. That poem is not immigration policy. That poem is not the way that the American founders conceived of what a nation state is. Certainly not as John Jay conceived of it in the Federalist No. 2. Because a nation is constituted by a people. And that people has to define itself. And by defining itself, it cannot let in anyone or everyone. The million-dollar question, of course, is who can come in, on what terms, on what timeline, and so forth. Well, if you've been around the block as many times as I have in the right-of-center commentary, think tank business, the general information business, you kind of learn to gravitate to certain people. You kind of come to gravitate to certain organizations in general. And as someone who has cared a lot about the immigration issue for essentially my entire adult life, I have come to be a really big fan of a think tank called the Center for Immigration Studies, and in particular, I am just a longtime fan of their head, of their executive director. He's become a friend as well. Mark Krikorian is the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies. He's basically a one-stop shop for everything immigration related. He's a trusted resource and just a genuine mensch as well. So, Mark, thank you for joining the Josh Hammer Show. We really do appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the kind introduction.
You bet. Certainly very well-deserved. So, Mark, I kind of want to zoom out and have a 35,000-foot altitude level view conversation with you. The immigration issue, as you and I know, as this audience knows, this really is the sine qua non. This is the sine qua non, the indispensable issue for MAGA, for the America First Coalition. Think back to Donald Trump's escalator speech at Trump Tower in the summer of 2015, all that the 2016, 2020, and 2024 campaigns all really embodied and in many ways revolved around a particular approach to immigration. So I want to just kind of get your high-level thoughts here. Let's begin with what is going right. We'll kind of then go with what is going wrong. We'll have that conversation as well. A lot of judicial nonsense kind of gets into that part of the equation. But let's start with the positive, and then we'll go towards the negative. From your perspective, Mark, what are the top, call it, 2 or 3 things that from a specific immigration-related perspective are going actually really, really well, very much according to plan thus far in the second Trump administration?
I'd say number one is that not only is the border, well, let me do it differently. Number one is the border is not a disaster anymore. We have the lowest number of apprehensions at the border since like the 70s or something. And even then, I think it was probably higher than it is now. So, and that's kind of people just kind of assume that and don't really realize how remarkable that is, considering what a disaster we had for 4 years. Number two, and this is related to that, is that the illegal population is declining significantly, mostly through self-deportation. We did a study on this, and through July, January through July, the total foreign-born population declined 2.2 million. Of that, 1.6 million were illegal aliens. In other words, more than that left. That's a net number. So there's always illegal immigrants coming, and there's always illegal immigrants going home. Even under Biden, illegals were going home. What's happening now is fewer are coming in, more are going out. And so the direction is clearly, positive. People are frustrated. They're saying, well, there's still too many illegal aliens. It's like, well, the administration hasn't even been in office for a year, and the numbers are going in the right direction. So that's positive. And the third thing I'd point to is this administration is taking seriously the pervasive fraud in the, quote, legal, unquote, immigration system. I mean, every legal immigration category, visa category, is just riddled with fraud, and this administration is taking it seriously.
So I do want to get to the other side of the ledger as promised, but first I do want to follow up on bucket 2 at least, which is the notion that the legal alien population here in the United States is markedly, and you are saying based on repeated studies from your organization, it really does look like it's declining, which is very much my impression as well based on all that I have read and all that I have seen. I guess the question, Mark, is What is attributable to that? Is this kind of Mitt Romney 2012 style self-deportation? Is this Tom Homan and Kristi Noem and ICE engaging in a lot of these high-profile raids that have upset the Antifa left-wing anarchist crowd? Is it some combination thereof? Is it something else? What is it exactly?
Yeah, it's all of the above. I mean, look, people, as far as the inflow of illegal immigrants, and remember, the border isn't the only way you come in. You can also come in on a visa and then not go home, visa overstays. People making those decisions are, rational actors. Are they saying, is it really worth the money and the risk and all of that to do this? And we're not letting people go anymore if they come in illegally. And so why would you pay all this money to a smuggler, borrow money, go into debt, and take risks too, potentially, to, if you're just going to get locked up and sent home or even maybe sent to Uganda or something? Why would you bother? And so fewer people are doing that. Of people who are here, most of them who have left on their own. And that's partly because, like I said, people always leave on their own anyway, but also the environment has changed. The administration has been consistently saying, folks, pack up on your own terms and go home. And that way you preserve the opportunity maybe to come back. You avoid the indignity of being arrested and all that. And so otherwise we're going to come and get you. And so I think it's all of those things put together have changed the calculus that illegal immigrants, especially more recently arrived ones, are basing their decisions on. And they're just saying, there's a lot of reporting on this too. People are saying, the party's over. We need to get out of here, take the money we've earned so that we don't even lose that, and go back home.
I want to just drill down briefly on the visa overstay. Again, I'm kind of putting off the going to the other side of the ledger. I promise we will do that sooner rather than later. But the visa overstays, Mark, is a sub-issue within this conversation that I have long been deeply infatuated, borderline obsessed with, and I'll tell you very clearly why, which is that, as I've said repeatedly in my book, among other places, 9/11, when I was in 12th grade, I was 12 years old, I was in 7th grade, 9/11 was one of the really formative moments of my life. 9/11 was kind of the moment when I realized that there is evil in this world, and that if there is evil, then there is good. And once you kind of morally intuit that there is this moral dichotomy between good and evil, you essentially already have a conservative worldview, whether you realize it or not. I say all that as context because when the 9/11 Commission finally releases their reports, they have as one of their starkest public policy recommendations to the Congress to crack down on visa overstays, biometric visa tracking, for the very simple and obvious reason that people that are not in this country cannot commit acts of terror against this country. This has always struck me as just astoundingly obvious. John McCain back in the day, Lindsey Graham, folks like that will say, oh, you have to fight them there before they come get us here. And to be clear, I'm not dismissing that, okay? I mean, I'm not an isolationist. I'm not a neocon either. I have a middle ground foreign policy. But so much of our woes when it comes to MS-13, when it comes to Trendy Arago, when it comes to gangs like that in our own hemisphere, as well as the Sharia supremacists, the Islamists from the Middle East, so much of this could be solved by genuinely getting to the bottom of the visa overstays. Do you have the sense that the administration really understands this, and are they acting on that? And is that partially responsible for the dwindling illegal alien population as well?
Yeah, I think it is partly responsible, and the administration does get it. There are more things they need to do, but the stuff they're doing up front is better vetting and screening of people. And the screening isn't just checking whether someone's on an Interpol, wanted list. That's kind of a, that's a gimme. I mean, that shouldn't even be an issue. They're actually now checking your Twitter feed, your Facebook postings, all of that kind of stuff, so that if you're somebody who hasn't committed a crime, and, you're a reasonably plausible candidate for, say, a student visa, but then they look at your Facebook page, and it's all death to the Jews, death to America. Now it's like, sorry, First Amendment doesn't apply to foreigners abroad, and you don't get your visa. So that's one thing they're clearly doing. It's not so much an overstay issue, it's a keeping this poison out of the country. The overstay thing they do need to work on. It's a harder nut to crack, but it's a little better than it used to be. Before 9/11, it was a complete joke. Now there's actually some better tracking of people making sure people leave and comparing flight manifests, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of work left to do to make sure that the people we let in actually go home when their time has expired. And, they're moving in that direction, but there's a ways to go there.
We're chatting with Mark Krikorian. He's the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies. Wonderful work at his organization. Mark, I've been putting off the other side of the ledger, but why don't we go ahead and go there? We were just talking about what the Trump administration has done right thus far. You were giving us some excellent examples. What has room for improvement? I won't say what's gone wrong now, because I'm not sure anything has gone legitimately wrong, but what leaves room for improvement from an immigration enforcement perspective?
I'd have to say the first thing that comes to mind is the administration's excessive openness to employer complaints about jobs Americans won't do, this kind of thing, especially with regard in farming. And it's not even just that the president has said, well, we're going to give the farmers a break or some such thing like that. It's that even the policy, the Labor Department, for instance, not too long ago, changed the rules for the guest workers that come in. So this isn't illegal aliens. These are agricultural guest workers, and allowed farmers to pay them less. In fact, what we need to do is the opposite and sort of set a predictable course into the future that you're bringing in farm workers is going to cost you a little bit more every year so that farmers can kind of plan to wean themselves off of this addiction to foreign labor, whether it's illegal labor or whether it's legal guest workers. The illegal labor is worse because it's illegal, but economically they're both bad, and they both hold back productivity improvements and create competition for legal immigrant or American workers in those various fields that they would be better off without.
So I think back a few months ago over the summer, I think it was Kelly Loeffler, if I'm not mistaken, who was talking about kind of what you're getting at when it comes to farming and labor. What exactly do you think is going on here? Is this kind of just the old GOP, the old Chamber of Commerce wing, the old Wall Street Journal editorial board that's kind of just reasserting itself? And are they actually getting traction within the administration and by extension the current American right, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much that, that there's the Wall Street Journal, Chamber of Commerce folks are kind of staging a comeback or something. I don't think that's what it is. I think that the president just has a weakness for this argument. I mean, even when he ran in 2016 during the presidential debates, he was saying, well, we need these seasonal workers at hotels and farms because Americans won't do this work. It's just not true. But the problem is, I think there's a lot of people who believe it. That's the problem. And in farming is the one place you can make that argument sort of plausibly, because it's not like there's a lot of people lining up to pick lettuce. But there's no reason a modern society like ours should have people, kneeling in the dirt, pulling plants out of the ground with their hands, which is what a lot of fresh fruit and vegetable farming agriculture is, without this access to enormous amounts of foreign labor, legal or illegal. Farming would become more productive, more mechanized, more automated. And that's the direction I think policy needs to move us toward, not this idea of making it easier and cheaper to import, I won't say slave labor, but it's, controlled, unfree labor.
Let's talk a little bit about student visas. There was a troubling comment from the president a month or two ago. I can't remember exactly when it was, talking about lots of Chinese students. And this landed like a total dud. I mean, you could basically hear a pin drop on right of center, Twitter, social media when this happened. Laura Ingraham of Fox News immediately basically saying, what the heck did he just say? And to be clear, the administration, to their credit, at least as far as I can tell, I missed it. I don't think they really followed up with this by announcing any sort of concrete initiative. It was kind of just the president speaking off the cuff. Mark, what is the correct way? What is the best way to think about student visas? Because I think back to my own college experience. I went to Duke back in 2007 to 2011. I feel like, I don't know. I mean, 25 to 35% of my class was probably foreign nationals, a shockingly high percentage of Chinese nationals. I actually studied Chinese for a year and a half. I feel like probably half my Chinese department at Duke was probably filled of like Confucius Institute's types, but neither here nor there. What is the best argument when it comes to student visas? What should we be doing? What should we not be doing?
we need a lot fewer student visas. I mean, we have, something like more than 1 million foreign students at any one time. The whole system is loaded with the kind of fraud that I'd mentioned earlier. But even without fraud, we need to understand American institutions of higher learning as a national resource. And admitting a small number of very qualified foreign students does in fact benefit the university and the country. That's not what we're looking at now. We are seeing, first of all, an enormous total number, but then also very, very high percentages at certain schools. There's a reason universities are tax exempt. These are subsidized institutions, even if they're not state supported directly. And the goal of those institutions should be to promote American leadership class and skilled Americans, not become just kind of this global institution that happens to be located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but has nothing to do with the United States. That's not the way we should be looking at universities, and therefore it's not the way we should be looking at foreign student visas.
What is your response to the popular talking point in certain circles? Oh, let's just staple a green card on their diploma. How do you respond to that sort of logic?
The president even said that in last year during a podcast. Now, look, like you said, the president says stuff, and some of it is kind of market testing. You know what I mean? In other words,
Right.
he referred to
Right.
when he talked about the Chinese thing, it was a dud. Well, I think part of the reason he said it is to see what people would say. So he does that. So I'm not super worried that like Trump is selling out or whatever. But the stapling a green card thing is crazy. If we're talking about, a PhD candidate or PhD recipient in some hard science from MIT, I will drive to his house and give him his green card. But this staple a green card thing, the idea is any foreign student, and the president had said even community college graduates with an associate's degree should automatically get a green card. That's just bonkers. That just turns higher education into this immigration avenue that pays the universities money. They pay them. And the United States is sort of, holding the bag for all these people that would be let in. So it's a terrible idea.
All right, so we're trying to get folks with Mark Krikorian. Follow him on X at Mark S. Krikorian, Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies, wonderful Washington, D.C.-based organization. Mark, we probably should talk a little bit about what I like to refer to as the judicial insurrection, because the judicial insurrection that President Trump has been facing since January 20th, to be clear, it touches on all the issues, but it definitely seems like the immigration issue is front and center of what these lower court judicial activists are trying to do. And, I'm the lawyer. We don't have to do the whole black letter immigration law thing there, but, kind of just zoom out and talk to me here from a basic kind of role of the courts when it comes to immigration perspective here. This seems to me to be completely preposterous. The political branches have plenary power when it comes to enforcing this nation's immigration laws. How would you assess the administration's responses or lack thereof to this judicial insurrection, and what would you like to see improved upon from their response to the judges when it comes to looking to year 2 of the administration ahead?
The administration, I think, is handling this right. They're not, defying the courts and setting up some kind of constitutional crisis, but they are relentless in pursuing these cases, because once they get to circuit courts and certainly get to the Supreme Court, they win, because all they're doing is enforcing immigration laws. The problem, of course, and I think the calculation of a lot of these district court judges who aren't really judges anymore, they're really political actors, as you suggested, is that if they do enough of this, a lot of it won't be able to be heard by the Supreme Court. That's kind of what they're thinking, is that, precedent be damned, we're just going to overwhelm the Supreme Court with these, frankly, I'm no lawyer, but these are illegal rulings, and hopefully some of them will stick. And I'm not really sure what the administration can do other than what it's doing, which is, relentlessly pursuing these cases, because Congress is the one that needs to limit the jurisdiction of these courts, set up some kind of procedures so that these challenges are dealt with expeditiously rather than everything having to be a emergency docket of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so you literally read my mind. This is actually exactly where I want to take the conversation next, Mark Krikorian, which is the role of Congress. We've spoken a lot about the administration here. What can the administration do? What have they done right? What could they do wrong? But as you and I both know, there are a lot of things that have to happen via the old school legislative process. As much as the old Barack Obama style, give me a pen and a phone mentality proliferates when it comes oftentimes to both parties' administrations these days, there really are still some things that have to happen the good old fashioned way. Schoolhouse rock, Congress signs a bill, President signs it. Mark, you're a policy wonk. I'm a policy wonk. I totally nerd out on this stuff, as I know you do too. What are give me the top 2 or 3 things that Congress should do, ideally ASAP, of course, when it comes to assisting and implementing President Trump's immigration agenda?
I would say the top 2 things I would point to, and these would not so much help Trump now, but be kind of insurance in the future against, President AOC or what have you. And one is to dramatically limit, if not end, immigration parole. Parole in the immigration context is a power that Congress has given the president to let in people who have no right to come in. But it's very limited. They added lots of adjectives to the law. And the point is, it's like if you need a gang member who's excludable, you're not allowed to give him a visa, but you need him to testify at some big trial, for instance. That kind of limited use. Biden used this limited power to let 3 million of the illegal aliens he let into the country and get work permits. That can't be allowed. The presidents cannot be trusted with discretion in that area. So number 1, either get rid of parole or dramatically limit it. Number 2, work permits, because immigrants are coming here just to get work permits. They don't care whether it's a green card. They don't care about that stuff. And unfortunately, administrations have interpreted very kind of ambiguous language in the law to be that they can give work permits to anybody they want, any illegal alien in any number for any reason if they just feel like it. That can't be allowed. Those 2 things would make a repeat of what Biden did much more difficult and are essential to get passed. There's all kinds of stuff that's related to now, for instance, limiting, and I would say number 1 thing would be limiting asylum, changing the rules, the statutory rules on asylum, because it is an anachronism. It's something left over from the end of World War II, beginning of the Cold War. It was designed for a handful of Russian ballerinas, and now it's become the mass vehicle for mass illegal immigration, not just here, but also in Europe, in Australia, even in Israel's got African illegal aliens wading across the Jordan River and saying, we want asylum. And so asylum has got to be the one thing that would help immediately in the short term and also in the longer term.
Yeah, longstanding problem, asylum abuse, to put it mildly. I think back to my first year of law school summer. I went to work for Senator Mike Lee on the Judiciary Committee, and I remember writing a whole lengthy memo about asylum abuse and various Supreme Court cases and what Congress should do there. So longstanding issue that's been front and center in my radar. I think you're very correct to flag it yet again. Mark, you've been very generous with your time. I want to get you out of here on not a policy wonk question, but a slightly more philosophical question, let's call it. There are so many ways to think about immigration. That's one of the reasons why I have been long infatuated with the issue, because it's the one issue, as I was saying in the opening, that really affects all areas of life: the economy, the culture, the security, everything. Everything is touched upon by the very nature of the polity, who we are, which is the ultimate question when it comes to immigration. And I guess the slightly broadly phrased question that I'll turn over to you is, speaking mostly of legal immigration, not just illegal, but legal immigration, how actually should we think about this conceptually? What is the best way that statesmen, that legislators should think about who to actually let into the country? There are a lot of folks who say that we should prioritize, highly skilled labor. That's the whole H-1B lobby and so forth there. That's not my stance. I suspect it's probably not your stance either. How do you think about immigration, who we should actually let into this country?
First thing, and this should go without saying, but does need to be said, is that immigration is just a policy choice. It's not just because there's a poem on the Statue of Liberty doesn't mean, everybody gets to move here. As far as how to think about it in setting immigration policy, I like to think about it as something that is fundamentally problematic in a modern society. Mass immigration is inconsistent, incompatible with the goals and characteristics of a modern society, because we now have a post-industrial economy, we have a welfare state, we have advanced communications and transportation that complicates assimilation and security. So the way I think about it, the starting point is minimal immigration. I'm sort of an immigration minimalist. Not zero, but starting from zero, sort of zero-based budgeting. And then look at what categories of people have such an overwhelming case to be let in that we let them in anyway. And just to give the short version of it, for me, that would be husbands, wives, and little kids of American citizens. Nobody really disputes that. There's a lot of fraud there, but if it's legit, everyone's for that. And that's a lot of people, 300 to 400,000 people a year. Number two, a handful of real Einsteins, not, a B- graduate from Hyderabad Community College, but real Einsteins. And then three would be genuine humanitarian asylum for people who literally have nowhere else to go and literally cannot stay where they are for one more second. It's not that many people like that. The UN keeps a list. You put all that together, the result would be, 50, 60% lower level of immigration than we have now, maybe 70% depending. And that would be, in my opinion, that's actually the moderate position, because it's not zero immigration, but it's not the disaster we have now.
Well, it makes a lot of sense to me. So one more time, folks, Mark Krikorian is the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies. Go check them out at CIS.org. Follow Mark on X at Mark S. Krikorian. Mark, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you for the fulsome update. We really do appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Thank you.